myths. The U2011 crowd really loved myths as the context for political debate. And I would sort of agree. Hey, nicely done. Just hit play. And I would say, you know, myth busting or challenging myths, reality checks form a good part of what good political reporting is. But you know, it's sort of hard because I'm essentially, like most journalists, very disorganized. So I'm usually the last person when the email goes out, hey, you're going to be on this panel, what do you want to talk about? I'm always the last guy to chime in. So, you know, I would have loved to talk about negative ads, but it was taken. So, I've done a number of these things. You think I would like immediately hit reply and say, I don't want negative ads, but I didn't. So, I was left to kind of think of, okay, a myth about, entirely about the performance and competency of the media, and probably the one that's the most top of mind for journalists is the current allegation that media, and I'll use the term that's become popularized among maladjusted bloggers and the socially conservative media of the right in the United States, the mainstream media, is this idea that there's an inherent bias that results in preferential coverage in the liberal media is the way they would describe it in the United States. The conservative government here would just say any media has an inherent bias because we're only now experimenting with media, perspective media, as they call it, the Sun TV attempting to kind of produce an echo of the Fox TV experiment in the United States. So we'll get into perspective media maybe very briefly. So that's the myth, and it is the reality for the Conservative Party of Canada. Most of the people in the Conservative Party of Canada, not all, because I do still talk to some of them. Next slide. Okay, so the reality is that, you know, media, journalism has a bias, an inherent, like there's no way, if you hear anybody start to, talk about the media and the word objectivity comes up, then you can pretty much identify that as a person, somebody who completely and fundamentally misunderstands what the media is all about journalistic traditions, and about human nature. There's no such thing. Objectivity, strictly speaking, is become a buzzword that really is meant, it's shorthand for fairness and balance. But even in fairness and balance, you still have bias. I mean, just the fact that we ask a question often will be perceived as bias. The decisions that we make on running stories, because we, on any given day in a newspaper, have many more stories than we could ever put in the newspaper. So the decisions we make on which stories to run demonstrate a bias. All of you, if you did what I do, would have a bias. You would go into it thinking some things are more newsworthy than others. The subjects of those stories would accuse you of having a bias, and perhaps an unfair bias. So bias is really not the issue. Fairness and balance is the issue. And I do not believe that it results in preferential or less preferential coverage for any party or politician. Now, part of the reason I believe that is because we have traditional postures that we take in politics. So for example, one of the biggest biases we have is that we spend more time reporting what government does than what opposition does. That's even with our smaller rationed media, it's the same tradition as it always was. The President of the United States gets more coverage than the Senate minority leader. They just do. And the Prime Minister or Premier and the governing party get more attention than the leader of the opposition and and I'm not saying that's in fact fair, but it is in fact, it's part of tradition is that when you're political reporting and you're reporting on government and public policy, you're primarily possessed by the need to tell people what the government is doing. And if you have an opportunity to provide some coverage of what the opposition thinks the government should be doing, that's valuable as well too. But the perception is our #1 job is to report on what government is doing. So we report on what the mayor does. We don't report on what every single city councilor wants to do. I'm actually willing to entertain articulate arguments about how that's an unfair bias, but I'll admit that it's a bias at this point. And in our reporting of the governing individuals or parties, we strike a traditionally adversarial pose. That's also a bias. I can make a very strong argument, though, for why a degree of responsibly delivered adversarialism is a responsible part of a good media. We're out there, actually, to ask the question 3 or 4 times until we get an answer. We're there to look for the flaws of public policy. We're there to look for proof of evidence of effectiveness of public policy. And that's adversarial, and it's going to put you into conflict with governing parties. And it is a bias, but I would defend that bias on the basis that I think it's part of the journalism and media making a strong contribution to the public debate. Could you go to the next slide? Okay. So we'll talk about the current sort of top of mind debate on bias, which is the media or the mainstream media and social conservatives, or, next slide, I had a cliffhanger slide, oh, that one. Just use the area there, yeah. The conspiracy to undermine the Conservative Party of Canada. This is not hyperbole. Is anybody here a Conservative Party member, card-holding member? It's okay, nobody, yeah, that's all right, oh, there you go. It's all right, we'll walk you to the parking lot but the fact is, like, when you move in your circles of Conservative Party members, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they believe that the media is out to get them, right? Gotcha, for the most part, okay, for the most part. So this is, I submit, wrong on 2 bases. One is, you're government now, and you get more flack and more attention. And if you can't live with that, the weakest possible response is to accuse the media of bias, or we're not going to deal with the media, they're biased against us. Okay, fine. You know, that's certainly one way of doing it. But, you know, honestly, most of what the Conservative Party of Canada as government experiences is the same form of scrutiny and adversarialism that all governing parties and prime ministers experience. Now, I'm going to go to what I believe to be ground zero for the current, if you go to the next slide, to the current sort of allegation of unfair bias. Because there is bias. I think I gave admitted to a lot of examples where there's bias. So unfair bias, okay. Stockwell Day and the dinosaurs. So it became known during the 2000 federal election campaign that Stockwell Day had, prior to becoming leader of the Canadian Alliance Party, had in fact said that he thought that dinosaurs and human beings walked the earth at the same time, and that the earth was approximately 6,000 years old. And you know, within the community of creationists, this is not startling or stunning or shocking information. However, you know, creationism has not really been a hotly debated political issue. It's, you know, even at this time, it was understood that that kind of social conservatism didn't sell well on the campaign trail. And so, you know, it was more or less considered the beginning and the end of Stockwell Day's career, political career. Now, you know, they lost the election. Liberals ran a very good campaign in 2000. The public was not unhappy with the job they were doing. The economy was hot. Government revenues were, you know, they were already talking at this point now and delivering the fiscal dividend from the government cutbacks in the 1990s. You know, it was, I'm not sure that was an election anybody from the Alliance was going to win. And remember that the Progressive Conservatives were also still running in that election. Joe Clark led the Progressive Conservatives. Okay, so where does the allegation of unfairness come from? Okay, the backstory is that this was, that Stockwell Day never actually said this, at least not during the 2000 campaign. That it came out in a CBC documentary on Stockwell Day, in which they quoted an academic from Alberta who had once heard Stockwell Day deliver a speech in which he said the world was 6,000 years old and dinosaurs and human beings walked the earth at the same time. And Stockwell Day would later file a complaint with the CBC Ombudsman that he was never asked prior, during the production of the video. They never gave him a chance to respond in the documentary. And in fact, didn't come to him afterwards and ask him to respond to this. They just threw it out there. In fact, I mean, this stuff had been floating around prior to the CBC documentary, which ran right into the campaign. And I guess, you know, nobody really took it seriously, but, you know, things are amplified during a campaign. And so, you know, it was reported, and so was Stockwell Day treated unfairly? Well, it became a big story. You know, Conservative Party people now, Alliance people, believe just the fact that it became a story was unfair bias. He never said it. He never actually said it during the campaign, but he also refused to say that he didn't say it. And in fact, the response from his party was, look, his personal religious beliefs are not part of the campaign. We're not going to get into that. So, I mean, everybody sort of acknowledges he did say it at one time. He didn't say it during the campaign. Reporters covering his campaign read, and you know, they always give the campaign plane a nickname. So Stockwell Day's plane was called Prayer Force One. There were several instances when they, because usually as journalists you get on the plane first, and then you sit on the tarmac for like an hour and 45 minutes, and then the leader comes on, and then you fly off. So when Stockwell Day and his entourage came on, the reporters on the plane began a tradition of humming the theme to the Flintstones. Okay. So in my bid to defend this story against allegations of unfair bias, that stuff doesn't help. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so it really, like, it became something that really dogged his career, like, forever and ever and ever, right? So when he left politics, they're still talking about the, you know, and the jet ski, which I could have showed you the photo of the spray of water, but that would have been unfair bias, I'm sure. So I think if you just go to the last slide. So, you know, the question comes down to, like, okay, was it a story? If it was a story, how could we have been more fair to Stockwell Day on this issue? Or could we have somehow reported his personal beliefs in a less biased way? You know what? Religious beliefs are part of a politician's resume. They just are. It's not fair to take a belief, and I'll use this word very cautiously, a sort of more extreme belief in a critical issue that's both secular and religious, and then not, you know, then claim that it was unfair to bring it up. And we know, in fact, that most Conservative Party members don't think that this is appropriate, because the last 10 years have been about the Conservative Party burying this kind of stuff, getting it off, you know, not encouraging people to talk about it. In fact, discouraging their candidates and their representatives from getting into socially conservative issues, because they don't want it to be part of the debate about whether the Conservatives should govern. So it's a potent issue. The media didn't make it into a potent issue. I think if you know, if a politician believes that the world is flat, or human beings and dinosaurs walking the face of the earth, that's a live issue. And it's not unfair bias. It may have been unfair for the CBC not to at least give Stockwell Day a chance to respond in the documentary, but we learned afterwards that he wouldn't have responded to it. He would have declined to respond to it. So, you know, I'm going to suggest that I don't know that there was a fairer way. I'm actually interested to know if anyone in the audience thinks there's a fairer way. I do believe it was a story, and I don't believe it's unfair bias. You know, like, and again, I don't want to offend any creationists in the audience, and I'm not saying that rhetorically, but you know what? It's not the majority. It's not the opinion held by the majority of Canadians. And when you're running in an election to win, and you're in it to win, you have to reflect at some point the views that are held by the majority, and that's a practical issue. If you're not reflecting the views, you're not going to win the election. So I don't know that there was a fairer way of dealing with this, and I do think voters had a right to know that he thinks that dinosaurs and human beings coexisted. And I think that's, I'm going to leave the rest of it just to build into some, you know, histrionical debate now. So, go.